Hello summoners and welcome back to another ProGuides video. Once again, we're out here trying to help you guys improve, and this is a topic today that we know a lot of you guys will enjoy. In spite of not returning home with the Summoners Cup this year, Faker is still regarded as the greatest mid laner of all time. Faker! So many players, including professional ones, model themselves off of his playstyle and continue to learn from him as he simultaneously develops as a player. In this video, we are going to talk about things that Faker does that you can incorporate into your own gameplay. And while we don't think that anybody can become Faker in a single day, trying to emulate some of his play definitely doesn't hurt you and can help you both in the short and the long term. For today's question of the day, is Faker overrated for you? Personally, I don't think so, because even though he hasn't won Worlds in the past few years, this guy is consistently improving and making a name for himself in competitive play. What truly determines a player's worth isn't just a single game or a single title, rather their long-term record. Are you getting ganked in your own lane, constantly demolished? Well, don't worry, we've got you covered, because ProGuides is the #1 proven way to quickly level up your League of Legends skills. Whether you're looking for tier lists, champion guides, coaching, or courses from your favorite pro players, ProGuides is where you'll find them. Even players like Nightblue, Bunny Fufu, and Loco Doco support ProGuides. So what are you waiting for? Click the link below to start improving right now. The first thing that Faker does is quite simple, but much easier said than done. It's really that Faker isn't afraid of taking damage. Now listen, there's a difference between right-clicking your opponent and running it down and taking damage intelligently, so we will break it down a little bit. In League of Legends, health is a resource. It is one that regenerates, but it is a resource nonetheless. In the way that you trade in gold for items, you can think of health as something you trade in for gold. Because every time you farm, you put yourself at risk of taking damage. Every time you trade, you do so with the intent of building a gold advantage in the long run. Most players are usually afraid of taking damage because they'll think that they get low and possibly die to their opponent or to a gank. This really isn't something that's easy to get over, but you have to understand that especially at higher levels of play, nothing comes for free. If you ever watch Faker's replays, you will see how he intelligently trades and how he doesn't take damage for free. He is constantly spacing himself and attempting to avoid taking unnecessary damage. And then even when Faker does take damage, it's often from an ability rather than some random basic attack, so at the very least, he's making their opponent waste his mana. In the end, because Faker has mastered the balancing act of understanding when he should take damage and when he should instead play safe, he rarely dies for free and consistently pulls ahead in games. There are often times where Faker doesn't even touch the wave, as he knows that it will come back to bite him later. This isn't an easy task at all, but the way that you learn this is through experience, tracking the enemy jungler, considering your own jungler's position, and constantly assessing risk. If you want to say mechanics, and say that, oh, Faker dodges skill shots or always hits his skill shots, that's true. That can play a role here. But League is definitely a game more focused on knowledge rather than just raw skill. Faker has practiced enough to have both, but all players can learn to apply the knowledge whether or not they think they have the talent. Another thing that Faker does is something that we talk about a lot, other guides talk about, and even likely players in your games talk about: control wards. Faker buys control wards, and so should you. No, this isn't some propaganda scheme, and I'm definitely not in any danger. Okay, but seriously, guys, buy them. They're cheap, and there's rarely a reason to not do so. Now that we've established that Faker always buys them, let's talk a little bit about how he uses them. The timing of Faker's control ward placement really matters a lot. Whenever he plants his control wards down, Faker always makes sure that he either has his jungler nearby or that he has lane priority. He wants to make sure that he's in a position to protect it. It's a pretty terrible feeling to place your control ward only to watch it get destroyed by an enemy shortly after. In terms of warding, the big thing to note is that Faker rarely ever goes for shallow wards. He always makes an effort to travel a little bit further, that way his wards can give him and his teammates more information. Whenever he has pressure from his teammates nearby, he will also delay his warding until necessary. You may be pretty surprised to know that recently Faker has been heavily prioritizing his boot purchases. Although typically they're not providing very much combat power, with Boots of Mobility providing none at all, Faker usually makes the most of the extra movement speed that they provide. Rushing boots alone usually isn't enough, because to fully utilize it we have to go over the strategy behind it. We all know that boots give you movement speed, which really leads to 3 side effects. Number 1, you can roam more effectively. Number 2, dodging skill shots becomes easier. And number 3, you can return to lane more quickly. Faker uses this last benefit the most when he purchases boots. If possible, he will try to control the minion wave, build slow pushes, and then take an early recall once he has enough money to buy an early pair of tier 2 boots. Basically, you have to learn to play around wave control. Do whatever you need to do in order to ensure that you can fit in an early recall with enough gold. The best case scenario is if you can push in the cannon minion wave so that you'll arrive back to the wave that doesn't have one. At the 2019 World Semifinals, we actually saw both Caps and Faker utilize this strategy in their 4th game against each other. The reason this strategy works so well is that if you do it when your opponent doesn't buy boots, you'll end up being the first back to lane. In cases where you get to recall and your opponent isn't able to push in the lane quickly or for some reason chooses not to, you will then come back just as strong as them. To help you visualize this, let's say that both you and your opponent started Corrupting Potion, spending your first 500 gold on it. If you can successfully recall early, buy your completed boots and return to lane, you will still be just as strong as your opponent as both of you only have a Corruption Potion in your inventory. The difference, of course, is that you will have some shoes on. However, if you buy Mercury Treads or Sorcerer Shoes, you'll of course then have a slight combat advantage, as well as a significant movement speed advantage over them. In cases where your opponent recalls with you and doesn't buy early boots, you will be the first to arrive to lane much quicker, and then can make them miss the next wave after you push it in. If you've ever watched Faker's stream or his pro view and seen his point of view in his games, you'll know what we mean when we say you might get a bit dizzy. Something Faker is constantly doing is using his F keys, which allows him to instantly look at his teammates' point of view. Like we mentioned, League is a game more focused on knowledge than mechanics, and information is crucial to make use of your knowledge, and Faker gets the most information he possibly can by constantly cycling through his teammates' point of view. In terms of when he does this, it's basically when he's backing away from the wave or has finished shoving it in. Basically, what he wants to do is when he's under no direct pressure, sometimes even checking while he's farming minions, he will then press his F keys. Because Faker's doing this so much, he's really able to better understand if there's going to be a gank or a dive opportunity, and that it also is going to inform him if he's under any pressure from potential roams from enemy side laners. Whenever he sees low enemies in either side lane, he will often roam for a dive with or without his jungler. A term that's become ubiquitous with Faker has been pressure, and he's always been known for how much pressure he applies. Faker does this in many different ways, but it really starts with his laning phase. Anyone who's attempted to learn mid lane has probably already watched some content in regards to Faker and knows that he really doesn't give his opponents any breathing room. If they want to farm, he makes sure that his opponent has to work for it. In winning matchups, he will heavily punish his foes and make sure that they take damage if they ever miss position. Even in losing matchups, he's constantly using his movements to apply pressure and bait his opponents into wasting mana. Outside of his 1v1, Faker creates a lot of map pressure as well, and the way that he does this is something that anyone, and I mean anybody, can do. Whenever he recalls, he will motion toward either of his side lanes and then recall in a brush. The reason he does this is that it leaves his opponents guessing. Sure, it's likely that he recalled, but the fact is that he even made the attempt to move towards top or bottom lane could potentially signal a gank attempt. This makes it so his opponents really don't know, so they will either have to respect him and back off, or ignore him completely and then potentially die to a gank. Doing this repeatedly over a game also conditions your opponents into thinking that you normally recall, and then once you finally do roam, it will come as a bigger surprise to your opponents. Faker is the king of mid lane, known for countless solo kills and hard carrying his games, but what you probably don't know is how selfless of a player he really is. All those highlight reels and montages you see of him are conditionally picked pieces of the bigger picture. In a lot of his games, Faker is actually a very selfless player who does what he needs to do in order to ensure the success of his teammates. After all, it's a team game, and Faker knows this. What makes Faker such a great player isn't just his ability to outplay his direct opponent 1v1, but how much he can impact the game, even for his teammates. This is probably the hardest part of the game in regards to game knowledge, because you have to understand when you need to make sacrifices. Faker has played the game so much that he can immediately determine whether giving up a wave, deciding to not completely push one in, or anything else like that is instead worth it to just help a teammate. While he usually isn't doing this in the very early game, Faker will start valuing minions a little bit less around level 7 and onwards. Honestly, this starts to make sense because losing one minion matters a lot more in the very early levels rather than the later ones where you need significantly more experience for the next level up anyway. In many of Faker's games, he usually isn't even picking up any solo kills on his opponents since they most of the time play very respectfully and leave no potential opportunities to do so. To remedy this, however, Faker is always looking at his teammates like we mentioned earlier, that way he can find kills elsewhere on the map. While many superstars play for themselves, Faker often plays for his teammates. While this might sound like what we just talked about, our focus is on Faker in terms of his income. Faker isn't a player who needs insane gold leads to carry games. He always has a heavy influence on the game regardless of whether or not he's ahead, and a big part of this is that Faker farms exceptionally well. Practice has paid off for him, and it's very rare for him to miss any farm at all. This allows him to maximize how much gold he gets, regardless of what happens in the game. Oftentimes, he won't even push for turret plating or look for some other play instead. A roam, a scuttle crab, or a recall are all options that benefit his team more than himself. This allows him to have more opportunities to potentially assist his teammates as well. This isn't something that can be learned in a day, but in order to be a great player, you need to learn to be confident in your ability to function without several random kills that you picked up during the laning phase. Speaking of confidence, that's going to be our final point, because Faker has a lot of it and you can very easily see it in his play. Whenever he goes for those risky plays, when he manages to earn a spot on a highlight reel, even when he fails and tosses a huge lead, he's got guts. Where does this confidence come from? Well, experience and failure. While it's generic, that's something that everybody needs to understand. Faker wasn't born a superstar, he had to work hard to get where he is. Your failures, as long as you learn from them, are steps towards your growth as a player. How does Faker know that he can go for those insane outplays that he makes over and over again? Well, he hops into solo queue and just goes for it. If it doesn't work out, then he chalks it up to unlucky, learns from it, and then makes sure to apply that knowledge in future games. If it, however, pans out according to plan, then it was definitely calculated because he's Faker, the Demon King of the mid lane. But nevertheless, he still learns from those and can apply it in all his following games. By taking risks and learning from them, anybody can grow as a player and come to understand when they just need to go for it. Alright, that's going to conclude this video. Thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, make sure you check out ProGuides.com to take your game to the next level, because we have so much content over there, and we want you guys to check it out to make sure you stay tuned in, and stay tuned to our YouTube channel as well. Until next time, good luck on the Summoner's Rift, and we will see you all in Season 10.